Saturday morning cartoons were awesome. From the 1960s through the 1990s, we kicked off each weekend in a frenzy of animation that is unmatched today.
But were these shows actually any good? Join us as we dig into the history of your favorite and not so favorite Saturday morning cartoons, look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of each one, and determine if our nostalgia matches the reality when it comes to these tunes.
So stay in your PJs, grab a bowl of cereal, and settle in. I'm John.
And I'm Robert.
And this is Toon Talk.
So John, when you think back of all the TV shows you've watched, whether it's cartoons or live action or anything like that, is there any show that there's a song that you associate with it, and a good song that, like, you know what, this is a good song, and yeah. I like that the show is using it.
I liked A Place Where Everyone Knows Your Name from Cheers.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's just a neat song, and it's well done, and it stands alone outside of the show. Mm-hmm. But when you hear it, you think of the show.
And it fits the show.
And it fits the show,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely, yeah. The song that crosses my mind is a little more obscure, but it's Next Year by the Foo Fighters. It actually was the opening credit for the show Ed, which ran on NBC with Tom Cavanaugh and
I know that show.
And interestingly enough, it was the first season, and then they moved to something else for second season, and then they came back 3, 4, and 5, and they finished it with the rest of it. But it's a good song on its own. I mean, it's Foo Fighters, but then it just again really fits that show really well, and you can see it like you could have a hit with this song. That would work, but
for sure,
yeah. And the other one that I would honorable mention to me would be Daydream Believer by the Monkees, which again, a little bit different because it was intentionally made for that show, meant to be released as a single, and did very well. Yeah. And that ties in very well with today's topic, which is the Archie Show.
The Archie Show, yeah.
Which has some very strong ties to the Monkees.
Yeah. So, it seems like, what I found is it was made to emulate the Monkees.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they even brought in some people who, behind the Monkees, kind of tied into the Archies. And there's a bit of a connection in there, but
cool.
We will get to that.
And
instead of starting in 1968 when the show starts, we're going to go back, hit in the Wayback Machine to 1939.
Oh boy!
And back then in 1939, kind of seeing the success of Superman comics, John L. Goldwater partnered up with Louis. This name is gonna kill me all. I'm not going to say it much because I'm going to stumble over it. But Louis Silberklight and Maurice Coyne, and they started up a publishing company, MLJ Magazines. So Goldwater was convinced that he could duplicate the success of the Man of Steel in a comic book, but one about a normal, everyday teenager. Not like just somebody with superpowers. He wanted to do an everyman appeal. So he took inspiration from the Andy Hardy movies that starred Mickey Rooney and very popular at the time, and kind of convinced MLJ to start publishing stories about this character he came up with called Archie Andrews. And Archie would debut in Pep Comics number 22 in December of 1941. And it was actually went over really well. It was actually really a big hit. And Archie Comics started really going gangbusters right from the jump. It was very popular.
Cool.
And so by 1946, MLJ Magazines would actually change its name to Archie Comic Publications. So within 5 years, this thing was already, all right, it's Archie
taken
Comics.
Over the company.
This is it.
This is our masthead now.
Yeah. So Archie was meant to represent the all-American teenage boy and, the good-natured charm, busy navigating the travails of adolescence, of adolescenthood. And of course, there's a love triangle for him to struggle with, and he had to try and figure out if he should choose between the pretty blonde girl who adored him or the pretty dark-haired girl who adored him. Every teenage boy has that problem.
Right,
That was my experience, your experience, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
That was just...
Boy, I'm glad I'm past that part of my life.
What's a boy to do?
Yeah.
But Archie would branch out off the pages of the comic books, and he would there would be the Archie Andrews radio program, which again, to show how popular a comic book was, the radio program started on May 31st, 1943. So less than 2 years after the comic book debuted, they were on a radio show on NBC, the NBC Blue Network. So the show would kind of later move to the Mutual Network and then end up back on NBC radio and would run through September 5th of 1953. So, a good 10-year run. And again, the comics are going strong, and so they decided to try and, well, let's put this on the small screen. TV's popular. This is a thing now. The kids like this. Let's do this. And they made an attempt in 1962 and another one in 1964. Both were live action pilots, and both never made it past that stage. The pilots were debuted, and you can dig them up online, and you can see why they didn't succeed.
Yeah, I watched a couple of them.
So they clearly weren't. They really didn't have the spirit of the Archie comics. It was in kind of Archie in name only.
Yeah.
But that was it kind of stumbled and didn't make TV. But in 1967, we've touched on Filmation Animation before, where 1967 was kind of their boon year, where they landed that DC Comics license, and they were going gangbusters with Superman, Aquaman, the Justice League, and they were kind of tired of doing superhero comics. Like, this is great, we're making a lot of money, but there's something else out there. I mean, the whole industry is all superheroes, and
we're missing
sci-fi,
a niche.
There's let's diversify a little bit. And knowing that they had success with a licensed property and they were having trouble selling their own ideas, they went out in search of a licensed property. And Archie Comics kind of scratched that itch, because it's a comic book, but it's not superheroes.
Right.
It's licensed. We know we could make this work.
Mm-hmm.
So they reached out to Archie Comics, and Archie's like, yeah, sure. Let's do that. We can't get our own things off the ground, so maybe you can help us with that. And so then they turn around and pitched it to CBS, and our good friend Fred Silverman, who we talked about with Scooby-Doo,
knows a thing or two about how to make this work.
Yes, kind of sees that, and again, the writing's on the wall for TV executives at that time. So like, look, superheroes are they're going gangbusters, but something's going to something would eventually force them to change, make that change. But Silverman was a little bit ahead of the curve, along with Filmation at that point, and they moved ahead with the greenlighted the Archie Show. So 1967. There's another big hit on TV. We mentioned at the opening. It's The Monkees.
The Monkees, which I loved.
Oh, it's a fantastic show.
Monkees is great.
Even though it holds up, like the comedy holds up really
for sure.
well.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, The Monkees, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's a fictional rock band that was introduced through this television show. They were all 4 actors put together, all had musical backgrounds.
Right.
And were kind of called The Monkees. And through their comedy show, half-hour show, they would introduced new music, and released albums. They didn't tour initially. Eventually, they would tour, and they were an absolute smash hit.
Right, and I didn't know the Monkees until the late '80s, when they were on VH1. That's when I started watching the Monkees, and the show was already 20 years old.
Yeah, I think they really kind of hit a new audience in the early, I think, mid '80s with MTV. Mm-hmm. Actually ran them for a couple of years, and then VH1 picked it up, and they found a whole new audience and found really took off again, and so there's
incredible that they had 2 lives with that.
Yeah, and we don't have to go in the whole. There's a long very
story
interesting story about the Monkees, not only just on making music, but also the show. But they basically provided the template,
right?
That Filmation looked at that and decided, you know what? That's how we should do the Archie Show.
But it had a dog that talks to himself.
That monologues.
Monologues, yeah.
So, but ultimately, we're going to tell Archie stories, but they're going to, the show is going to center on pop music.
Right.
We're going to make it
pop.
We're going to make it, really, really, really get the kids on board. Like get them where they live. We'll be hep. And they created 2 story segments that would sandwich then 3 shorter segments. There would be a dance of the week.
Right.
There would be the song of the week. And then there would be a segment built around like a single gag or a single joke.
A little joke, yeah.
The format was all set, and they moved ahead, and the Archie Show debuted on CBS on September 14th, 1968. It would run for 17 episodes and proved to be a huge success. I mean, massive success.
Mm-hmm. Tons of spin-offs afterwards.
Yeah, it's interesting. As we talk about, this is a for all intents and purposes, this is a one and done series.
Mm-hmm.
They ran 17 episodes, and that was the end of the Archie Show.
Yeah.
But as you said, it would live on in spin-offs because they would recreate it over and over and over. So, the next year they retooled it. It was the Archie Comedy Hour, and they introduced Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Mm-hmm.
And so they added 2 full segments of Sabrina cartoons and then added additional short comics in there, whether it was Sabrina's, like, she would do like a little magic segment, or there'd be Dilton Doiley's, kind of humor thing. It would be kind of loosely based on Laugh-In for all those little segments.
Those little skits, yeah.
And so it's slightly different than the Archie Show.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would be followed up the next year, 1970, with Archie's Funhouse, which again kind of took that same idea and then retooled it again. So there's the giant jukebox, which is a very music heavy incarnation of the series. They added more music to it.
Yeah.
And then that one, actually, there was a crazy, if you ever see the intro to that one, it's crazy. It's like it's a live action segment of these young kids running into like this auditorium. They're literally running in and jumping and screaming and losing their minds as the Archie band
is on stage.
The cartoon Archie band is playing music. They're playing the Everything's Archie theme.
Yeah.
And these kids are just going ape.
Wow.
I mean, they look like they've just been they've been given like 5 bags of pure sugar and then just set loose in this auditorium.
Yeah. So when I was on YouTube doing some research, looking around, you just type in Archie Show and you go down a rabbit hole fast. Yeah. There's so much stuff. All the way from all the spin-offs to even today, like the live action Riverdale show. Mm-hmm. That's on TV right now.
Yeah.
It was hard to find what I was really looking for because there was so much chafe out there, but I eventually did find it, but I don't think I saw that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
This is like the beginning of Hulk Hogan's WrestleMania where people are marching down the street. Did someone fall?
No, nothing that crazy. It's more just like, what are these kids on?
Yeah. Just wound up.
Just like, these kids are going.
Yep.
And they're all in on it. But yeah, so that was Archie's Funhouse. Again, 1971. There's Archie's TV Funnies, which, if you see it, there's actually very much if you remember from Saturday Night Live through the 80s and 90s, there's mostly the 90s, the TV Funhouse segments.
Oh, sure.
So
it was the animated version.
Yeah, the animated segments that would show up. There's very much a callback to this, the Archie's Funhouse, Archie's TV Funnies 2 series, and everything. Archie would be debuted on 1973 for 1 year. Again, that was just repeats of all kind of previous material. 1974, the U.S. of Archie, which told U.S. history segments using the Archie characters. And then the 1977 and 78, there would be the new Archie and Sabrina Hour.
Yeah.
So throughout the 70s, Filmation kept cranking these things out. They just retool them, come up with different stories, or they would just reuse them. And it stayed very lucrative for them. Yeah. Interestingly enough, there was one called Hero High, which was meant to debut in 1980-81. Meant to be Archie, but just as they started working on it, Filmation lost the rights to do Archie comics. So it just became this generic story, and it went nowhere.
Oh.
Yeah, so
that's terrible.
Yeah, it kind of fell apart on them. But yeah, so for the history of the show, the animation itself was extremely popular, and there's obviously another really significant component, which is the music, but we can go back to that in a second, because I actually really want you to talk a little bit about the voice acting on this.
Yeah, so a small cast, really, for this cartoon, because there were really only a handful, half a dozen real characters, and then there were bit parts here and there. Right. But obviously Archie Andrews is the kind of the leader of this little teen group. He's the front man for the band. They're called the Archies. That's voiced by Dallas McKinnon. He also did Hot Dog, Mr. Weatherby, who was the principal of the school, Pop Tate, who was the deli owner at
Pop's Chocolate Shop.
Pop's Chocolate Shop, which chocolate was spelled funny. He was Mr. Lodge, who's Veronica's dad. He was Coach Cleats, the gym teacher. Interestingly, he is also Gumby and Buzz Buzzard on the Woody Woodpecker Show.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have... the Gumby one makes sense, given like the way he does the Archie voice. But, I wouldn't have picked up the buzzard.
No, I didn't either. I'm like, oh, wow, Woody the Woodpecker. But when Archie sang, he was someone different. It was a different voice. That was Ron Dante, was the singing voice of Archie, who, I went down the rabbit hole on him too. He was a producer for Barry Manilow and also sang backup on a lot of Barry Manilow's songs, and most significantly, the song Mandy.
Yeah.
So Archie sang on Mandy with Barry Manilow, which I thought was great.
Yeah, and I noticed that Ron Dante actually too about that same time, but it kind of coincided with Barry Manilow, who had a lot of like jingle hits throughout the 70s. But Ron Dante was involved with a lot of jingles on his part too.
Sure,
so very much in the pop culture.
He was everywhere
for quite a while.
Yeah. And then Betty Cooper and Veronica Lodge were voiced by the same person, Jane Webb. In fact, she did all the female voices on the show. She was Miss Grundy.
We know one lady.
Yeah. Big Ethel. Oh, we need a woman on the cast. Let's get Jane Webb. Which Jane Webb was really good at that because she was also the voice of Marianne and Ginger on The New Adventures of Gilligan. So, the question, Betty or Veronica, they've also got the question, Marianne and Ginger. All four of them are the same person. So just take your pick.
At least in the animated film, yeah.
Yeah, in the animated film, they're all the same. Yes, so this woman, obviously very talented, played all the women characters on the show. The singing voice of Betty and Veronica was also one person, and that was Tony Wine. Tony Wine toured with Tony Orlando. And was also the voice of the Meow Mix commercial. Meow, 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 meow. That's Tony Wine, who was also Betty and Veronica. So everyone knows that commercial.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've made it big when you're doing cat food commercials after the Archie Show. She was the singing voice of both of them. So you had one actor playing Betty and Veronica speaking roles, and then one singer doing both singing voices. Reggie Mantle, who we'll talk about later. Okay. Reggie was the bass player in the band. He was voiced by John Irwin. John Irwin, as much of a jerk as he is on the Archies, was also He-Man.
Oh.
So he was He-Man in He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. He was also Beast-Man, Webster, Ram-Man in He-Man. So he played, it seemed like Filmation was famous for having one act do multiple voices to just try to save budget.
Yeah, a slimmer stable of actors.
Exactly, yeah. But not to be outdone by Tony Wine, he also did a cat food commercial. He was the voice of Morris the cat.
I was going to say, the only other thing I can think of is Morris the cat.
Yeah, so he was Morris the cat on the 9 Lives cat food commercial. So one series took both iconic cat food commercial people and gave them their start. Then we've got Forsyth Jughead Jones, voiced by Howard Morris. Howard Morris has a pretty interesting career. He was also Moose Mason, Dilton Daly on the Archie Show, but he's really best known as being Beetle Bailey in the Beetle Bailey cartoon.
I can see that, yeah.
He was a classically trained Shakespearean actor. He went to NYU. And then he played Ernest T. Boss on the Andy Griffith Show, which, if you think about it, is like a real-life adult version of Jughead, So he's this classically developed actor, but he plays these goofballs.
Yeah. When it comes up with that voice of Jughead, too.
Which is kind of grating. So he did other Hanna-Barbera stuff, too. He was on Jetsons, Flintstones, Magilla Gorilla, just as bit parts, nothing really big. But yeah, he was a classically trained actor, and they got him playing the goofball drummer guy, And then there's one other voice that I want to mention. There was a fill-in on episode 2, Beauty is Only Fur Deep. The voice of Jughead and Hot Dog in that episode, you want to guess?
I don't have a guess.
Don Messick.
Oh, there we go. I should have known.
Yeah, it had to be, right? They just put him in. I don't know what happened, if Howard Morris was unavailable or there was a contract dispute, but Frank Messick did the voice in that 15 minutes.
He's everywhere.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. It's crazy. Really a small cast, and it was interesting that they had 2 people playing one character, as far as a speaking voice and a singing voice.
Yeah.
Which you see in movies all the time.
Yeah.
You see and someone who can act but they need to sing and they can't sing. And then you've got a singer who can't act.
Yeah.
You've seen that happen. And it happens in Disney cartoons a lot of the time, too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that's the first time we've come across it in the cartoon world that we've been talking about. And it might be our first singing cartoon, actually. Yeah. It was a small group, but a good group. I mean, I thought the voices were good.
It was interesting. When I first started watching this, I actually found the voice of Archie and especially Veronica and Jughead just a little jarring. Yeah, because they're a little
very
higher,
distinct.
Yeah, they're a little higher pitched than I was expecting. When Veronica is this very weird, like a Southern belle. I guess when growing up reading Archie comics, I always had her as like this, the New England,
the posh city girl,
Catherine Hepburn type.
Sure, because her father's wealthy, right?
Yes,
like he owns the golf course and the country club.
Yeah, he owns everything
and a yacht.
He's the millionaire, and then so she's got more of that, that high. This was she's got this very whiny Southern belle type of voice. I mean, I the best I can describe it.
It's like Paris Hilton. That's who she kind of sounds like, but a Southern version of Paris Hilton.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and Archie's a little higher pitched than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Betty and Reggie are very much. I mean, they're straightforward. They're good, and then there's Jughead, who almost sounds like he's the child of Ethel Bunker. Oh, Edith Bunker.
Edith Bunker.
Yeah, like, okay, Arch.
Those were the days.
Yeah, it's like it's really high, kind of like this whiny kind of.
Yeah.
But as jarring as they were, after 2 or 3 episodes, like they work.
Yeah.
I mean, they're well done.
Yeah.
They're the acting, the emoting, everything is spot on. Is actually what you would want for this cartoon. Sure. So instead of grating on me and taking me out of it, initially it was jarring, but once I kind of got into it, like, this is the character. These are the characters, and it works well.
Yeah, works together, and they're
yeah.
So the characters. You want to talk about the characters for a second, because I had a problem with putting these people together on a daily basis. So Archie's kind of the hip kid. He's the cool kid. And Betty and Veronica are both in love with him. But I never established who was he really dating.
Well, and I thought, when you were, I don't know if you ever read the Archie comics.
I didn't, no.
It is very all-out war between the two of them. Betty and Veronica are still really good friends, but they are both madly in love with Archie. Yeah. And Archie loves them both, but he tends to lean towards Veronica because she's rich. And it felt like they downplayed that a little bit more in this cartoon than I was expecting, because I was expecting much more like the kind of
that's what I couldn't figure out, because
it really felt like this. It was like he and Veronica were together, and Betty was just kind of, she's there because they're friends with Betty. Yeah. And other than like there's an episode at the very end where it's Veronica's veil, where they start, Reggie and Archie are spending all their focus on Betty, and Veronica gets jealous and pretends like she goes off to go study overseas and puts a veil on and pretends she's from overseas.
She's in mourning.
And nobody can tell the difference between her and so she's suddenly a foreign exchange student just because she's wearing a veil. And so now they're all focused on her again, but even then,
because she's become novel because she's the foreigner,
and Betty's not upset because now Archie's not. It's just like, well, now the boys just aren't spending as much time with me. They're not paying attention to me as much.
Yeah,
and it's not like, I'm lovesick over Archie. It's just like, well, why aren't they paying attention to me anymore?
Yeah. What I couldn't put together is there's these two women. And they're both flirting with Archie in the presence of each other. But they never, come to blow. I guess I was expecting them to fight.
Yeah.
Because, Archie on the other side. And they're both touching him. And, it's like, what is going on? Do they not see what she's doing? Does Veronica not see what Betty is doing? That's what I couldn't figure out. And vice versa. It's like, it just didn't, I couldn't put that together.
It was the 60s, John.
It was, yeah. And then Jughead's the goofball fun guy. He's their drummer. They keep him around. He's got a dog. He's fun.
He's a Shaggy Rogers.
He's exactly who he is. Hangs out with the dog.
Loves to eat.
Kind of irresponsible. Loves food. But Reggie.
Oh, yeah, Reggie.
Reggie was an asshole. We might have to put an explicit lyric on this episode, but he was always picking on Jughead, always trying to foil Archie's plans, always doing... And these are his friends.
Yeah.
And he's always, like, trying to disrupt what they're doing, and they keep hanging out with him.
Yeah, that's the bottom line is, why do they spend any time with him? Because he's just a jerk.
The only thing I could come up with is that he was a hell of a bass player.
That's it. It's not like he doesn't have the car. He doesn't drive. Archie drives.
Nope, he doesn't have the car.
He's not rich. They're not relying on him for anything.
Yeah.
Anytime that they're going to do something at school, he's going to do it better, and he's a
jerk
like,
about it.
Yeah, he's like right up.
Yeah,
like,
the marathon.
Yeah,
the marathon episode we need to talk about later.
Yeah. But yeah, there's so much about what he does. He's not nice to them. They don't really seem to like him.
Right.
And yet...
But then they don't do anything about it.
And it's kind of one of those cartoon tropes where, like, you have the guy who's going to, like, oh, I'm gonna scare them, or I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
And they should know exactly who's doing it every single time, but they're always surprised, like, Reggie?
Yeah.
Like, well, of course it's Reggie.
What are you up to? Yeah, you think of a band like, well, maybe he had the van, and they needed the van to get from gig to gig, but he didn't.
Yeah.
And maybe he's the singer. No, he's not really. He's not the front man. He's not funding the band, because Veronica's dad's probably doing that. But yeah, I just, like you said, when I texted you that, you're like, they have no reason to hang out with him. And the only thing I came up with is that he must be good on the bass.
Yeah. and well, it's funny because they're clearly established that he's an egomaniac.
For sure, yeah.
He is very impressed with himself. And there's the one where he's going to try out for football.
Yeah.
And he's standing there with Veronica. He's like, he's like, I want a kiss from my biggest fan. And before she can lean in and give a kiss, he like pulls his arm up and kisses himself. He's kind of like, I mean, he thinks the world of himself.
Yeah.
And of course, then there's those little segments so the main stories, they'll have like this really brief introduction, kind of like just setting it up, kind of.
Yep.
And it's always if it's Reggie in his own bedroom,
right?
And there's pictures of Reggie on the wall, and then there's a dartboard with Archie's face, and then the punching bag of Archie's face.
I know, but that's like his best friend. I couldn't believe. I'm like, wow, he really hates Archie, but they hang out all the time, and Archie doesn't know that he hates him.
Unless there was like some weird rule in the Riverdale, like teenagers can't hang out together unless there's 5 of them in a group. So like, we have to have a 5th.
We need 5 people.
And Hot Dog, unfortunately, doesn't count.
Doesn't count. Yeah,
but yet he goes everywhere they go.
With them. Yeah, he even goes to the chocolate shop with them. I mean, he's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and Hot Dog's kind of like the voice of the audience with Reggie, because he can't stand Reggie.
No, and he's got this internal monologue, right? Because his mouth never moves.
Right.
He's not like Scooby where you see him talk.
Right. And they don't. And he doesn't. The kids don't hear him talk.
Kids don't hear him talk. He breaks the third wall.
The fourth wall. Yeah.
Yeah, the fourth wall.
He talks directly to the audience.
Yep.
And and he kind of says, kind of like the voice of reason at times, like, well, yeah, and anytime Reggie gets his comeuppance, they always show Hot Dog, and he's smiling at the camera, like,
I knew he'd get it. Yeah. See, there's justice.
It had it coming. So no, I agree with you. Reggie is he's an odd fit with this group, but if he's not there, there's a lot of conflict that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And
well, so if he's going to be the foil, make him the foil.
Yeah.
And find someone else to play in the band. Maybe he's in a competing band. Or he's just jealous because Archie gets all the chicks.
Or you get, or of course, then you end up with that weird Chuck White vibe that you get from the Brady kids. And that's not a good thing.
No, that didn't work.
So I guess at least if there's some kind of component where they like, for whatever reason they like him and they consider him a friend, I guess it works. It works a little bit better.
Sure. Maybe he had really cool toys. Everyone had that kid in the neighborhood. No one really liked him, but he had cool toys.
Like, all right, well, we'll stick it out. Yeah.
Well, we need a 9th player to play baseball. I guess he can come play.
Yeah, but and then when they do the music segments, he's into the bass. He is.
Oh yeah,
he's
jamming.
He's grooving.
Yeah,
he's on board. So.
Yeah. Almost as much as Betty is with that tambourine.
Okay. She's gonna hurt her hip.
Oh my gosh. She probably has an artificial hip in the latest series, Where are you getting that hip replacement?
As she aged, I'm sure she had major hip problems. she was really pounding away on her hip with that.
Yeah. Just loving it.
Yeah, lots of enthusiasm. But, well, speaking of the music, I mean, the Archie Show's impact really was significant through pop music, too.
Right.
Not just through cartoons. I mean, it would set the Archie Show up for success.
Yeah.
Moving forward. Because one of the key players in bringing the Archie to the small screen was Don Kirshner, the man who created the Monkees. So again, the Monkees are back. So when CBS came on board, the first thing they did, they reached out to Don Kirshner and said, "Hey, we want you to be the music supervisor here." And he's like, "Sure, yeah, I'll do that." And knowing that the idea was to debut a song with each episode, he's like, "All right, we got to move fast." So he brought in a producer, Jeff Barry, who he had worked with previously, and Barry had a track record of pop success with co-writer Ellie Greenwich, particularly with girl groups of the 60s. They kind of had a niche, and they had a lot of success there. So Barry comes in, and he kind of looks everything over, and he's like, "All right, we need to find people to perform these songs. You know, these actors are good; they're not singers. Right. We've touched on before." Yep. And Kirshner wanted Kenny Caron to come and perform the songs, but Barry's like, "You know what? I've got this guy, Ron Dante, a studio performer, studio singer. I'm a session guy. I've done a lot of stuff with him. I actually worked on a lot of promos that they would create and provide to Kirshner that Kirshner would react to. So Kirshner's familiar with his voice, whether he knows it or not. And so that he brought him in, and between Dante and Karen, they ran it by Kirshner's like, "No, you're right. Dante's the guy. Let's go with him." Yeah. And so he ends up with the job, and then they need a female vocal. So actually, the first person I went to was a woman named Jeannie Thomas. So she performs on the first few number of songs, and the first single that they would produce actually would show up on the first episode, and that's a song called "Bang Shang-a-Lang." Yeah, and it actually
it doesn't get more 60s than that.
No, and it climbs to number 22 on the Billboard charts in the U.S. I mean,
it's legitimate good pop music.
Yeah, I mean, it's
not like the Brady Kids music.
No, and
this was good music.
It is a good 1968 pop song. It's solid. It works, and it actually was included on their first. There was the Archie's LP, the long playing record, released in 1968, and it had 12 tracks, all of them which showed up on the. They actually released obviously 17 songs total for 17 episodes. 5 of them didn't make it, with good reason. and so the LP would actually peak on the Billboard album chart at number 88. So not quite the success of the singles, but they would also do the song 17 Ain't Young, which is this interesting track. Yeah. It became a top 40 hit in Australia. Not for the Archies, but for a singer named Frank Housen in 1969.
So he covered it.
He would cover it a year later in
Australia.
Yeah, and he would. Oh wow! Yeah, it would be a top hit for him in Australia. Of course, with anybody's familiar with the Archies, the real success of the Archies actually came a year later.
Yeah, 1969.
1969, and that was the release of their second album, Everything's Archie.
Yeah,
and that would have the. That coincided with the new series, the Archie Comedy Hour, and featured on that is the single Sugar Sugar, of course, which everybody's heard many times over.
So I didn't know this. I mean, I had a career in radio, and I played this song at one of the stations I worked at, adult contemporary stuff. What I found was Sugar Sugar wasn't on the first 17 episodes. It was like on the Archie Comedy Hour, like you said, but not only was it on Billboard's top 40 for it was number 1 for
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then it was the number 1 song of 1969. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you think about all the amazing music in the 60s, late 60s, 1969, I mean, the Beatles were a big deal in 69. And Sugar Sugar from the Archies is number 1. I knew it was a good song, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, that is the epitome of bubblegum pop. It just works so well. And again, 4 weeks at number 1, but that doesn't count the number of weeks it was on the charts for. I mean, it was on the charts for more than half the year. Yeah. Just kind of in up and down. One position or other. So yeah, it was a massive success. And of course, for that track, you had mentioned Toni Wine. At that point, she had been brought in to replace Jeannie Thomas. So she actually appears on Sugar Sugar and everything else on the Everything Archie album. The other voice on that one to go along with Dante was Andy Kim, who actually co-wrote the song along with Barry. And so he added his voice to the track. So it's actually 3 people singing on that track, which is different than most of the other Archie singles that had been released at that time. So yeah, it was a big success. I mean, they followed that up with the track Jingle Jangle, and that peaked at number 10. But that would pretty much be the end of the Archie success.
Yeah, but a couple of top 40 hits and Song of the Year in 1969.
Yeah. Three songs all go top 25.
Yeah. That's great.
And I mean, Bang Shang Lang, the first one, just missed on the top 20. I mean, it went to 22. They would actually, Barry left in 1970. He's like, all right, I'm moving on to other things. We're good here. So kind of with him, the songs just wouldn't have the same success. It just, he had the touch with that group. But there was one more Barry produced single through the Archies, which in 1971, a song called A Summer Prayer for Peace. Nowhere in the United States, but it actually was I believe a top 15 hit in South Africa in 1971 of all places.
Weird.
But, yeah, so it was interesting. So, and I mentioned that Archie's album included tracks from the show. There are 12 tracks, and I'm going to run them down really quick. So there's the Everything Archie, the Archie's theme.
Sure.
There's Boys and Girls, Time for Love, You Make Me Want to Dance, La-Dee-Doo, Down Down, Truck Driver, Catching Up on Fun, I'm in Love, 17 Ain't Young, Ride, 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 Hide and Seek, and Bang Shang Lang.
Yeah.
Not all winners.
No. But there's some good ones in there.
But that's just it. There isn't really a clunker.
No.
Like, it's like, turn this one off.
Some of them clearly stand above, but they're not bad.
Yeah, I mean, Bang Shang Lang is, like we mentioned, it's very much perfect for its time. It's really worked. Actually, the song Boys and Girls, which actually would show up in... and I'm sorry, I don't remember what episode it was in. But Boys and Girls would show up on the show.
Bang Shang Lang, episode 1.
That was Bang Shang Lang, episode 1. Boys and Girls would actually, I believe it was episode 2. So the first 2 songs that came out of the show were actually really good, solid pop hits.
Yeah.
Boys and Girls wasn't released as a single, but very much in that same vein.
Have.
I mean, it's just a really, it was fine. It worked. I mean, you could definitely imagine hearing that on the radio at that time.
For sure.
It just fit really well. Or hearing on oldies radio nowadays. So, yeah, I mean, overall it was good. There was definitely some clunkers. There was one at the end of the series that was called Circle of Blue, which, I don't know if you remember that one. It was...
I'm trying not to.
I love you, and you love him, and he loves somebody else, and we're all in a circle of blue. I'm like, what a bummer.
This is a sad, depressing song.
And of course, they illustrate it with dogs. So it's Hot Dog who loves this female poodle, and this poodle who loves this other dog, and this dog loves another a faceless dog. It's just like this silhouette of another dog that he loves, and it's just that one didn't work. But yeah, overall, I mean, the music was really good.
I agree. I thought the music was great. Unlike the Brady's music was it was bad.
Yeah.
Because, case in point, they were actors and not singers.
Right.
And it showed.
Yeah.
And these guys, they had actors and they brought in singers.
Yeah.
Which was a brilliant move.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not saying that Del McKinnon didn't sing. Maybe he did, but probably not as good as Dante.
Right.
So I think that was brilliant on their part. It's like, if we're going to make a cartoon based on a kid's band and they play music, let's make sure the music is good. Yeah. Which was missed in the Brady Bunch kids cartoon. So, but I thought that was a stroke of genius.
Yeah, no, it worked out so well for them, and it made the show work that much better.
Yeah.
I also wanted to touch on the dance of the week too, which is not a segment that did not work as well.
No, it didn't. So let's talk about the format of the show, because you mentioned it briefly in the overview. So they do the intro, which was usually Archie or Reggie in their bedrooms, like Archie's laying back on his bed with his stocking feet, and then Reggie's in his I Hate Archie bedroom, and they'd say, hey, what happens when we do this? We'll stick around and find out, and then they do the first story, which was about
8 minutes.
8 minutes, 7 to 8 minutes. Yeah. Then they would do the, hey, stay tuned for the dance of the week. And you'd see Jughead, mostly it was Jughead, or Veronica. Veronica's Walk was one of them, but doing this crazy dance that you would have to be a cartoon character to pull off some of these moves. And their big thing was, stay tuned for a dance that you can watch and learn.
Yeah.
Well, I can't do that. There's no way I can do that.
Well, even when you're watching, you're like, I'm not even sure what he's doing.
Right. Yeah.
They're kind of saying it, but in not every case. They don't always say exactly what the move is.
No, they show it to you.
They kind of start talking about, do the Weatherby.
Yeah.
And I go, what?
What is it?
Yeah. Well, and then Veronica's walk is just like, go walk like you've got, like a pole sticking up your backside, and
then stick your legs out.
Who's just gonna walk? That's your dance, is just walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would do the dance of the week, and then they're like, hey, now that you know the dance, here's the song that goes with it, which was kind of cool, because the songs were good.
Yeah.
It was the same animation every time they played a song. It didn't matter what the song was. The animation was the same. And then they would come back and do the short joke, which would take like a minute. And then they do the second story, which again, 7 to 8 minutes.
Yeah. And
then the end credits. So throughout the half-hour show, if you included commercials, there's about 15 minutes of story in there. And the rest of it is the intro, the joke, the dance, and the song. But it was consistent.
Yeah.
So you knew what you were getting.
Yeah. And what I liked about that, though, is when you read Archie Comics, that's kind of how Archie Comics are. There's a one main, maybe two big stories in it, but then there's a single page joke, and then maybe there's be like the Archie or Betty or pinup, a single frame image.
Yeah.
But again, then like a one page gag.
Yeah.
It would be like 6 panels on the same page that would tell the joke. It would be like that standalone gag, and then maybe there'd be another like a longer. I mean, it felt like
stayed true to the comic.
Yeah, it felt like you were actually watching the comic, which actually I thought worked really well. The dance was just the clunker. I mean, my favorite was the milkshake, where the only way you could describe what they have Jughead doing is just convulsing.
Yes.
I mean, he's just like
just
shaking. And it's like, that's not a dance. That's a seizure. You need to help him.
Yes.
That's not okay.
Make sure he doesn't hurt himself.
Yeah, something's wrong here. But and then there's was it the milk? I think it was the milkshake or the hamburger one where you're like supposed to stick out your gut like you just ate a bunch of food and then slap your stomach, and like nobody's doing that. No,
and the angel one was the one that's physically impossible.
Yes.
Physics, you can't do it.
Yeah.
It's just physically, not athletically, but based on the laws of physics, you could not do that.
Yeah, because you don't have wings, you can't fly.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's just silly.
Yeah, I did want to add to the milkshake. What I loved with that one, dumb dance matched up with this bad song, which was The Circle of Blue, this very slow song. Oh, yeah. And then you're supposed to be convulsing. Apparently, it was go into seizure because of this misery of this love triangle.
Yeah, you think it's more of a
quadrangle or whatever it is. Yeah. No, it's like act like you're drinking milkshakes, and then just like you got a brain freeze, and your body is just gonna go rigid into shock or something.
Man.
Yeah, most of the time it worked. That one didn't work.
Didn't match. Well, no, we haven't mentioned the head writer for the Archie Show was Bob Ogle. Bob Ogle wrote a lot of Shirt Tales.
Oh, yeah.
And he was also, what I found out when I saw his name on here, I'm like, I got to find out what else he did. So he was on Shirt Tales, and he was also the voice of Digger the Mole on Shirt Tales. And turns out he passed away during the production of Shirt Tales. So at the end of Shirt Tales, in the credits, there's a picture of all the characters on the left side of the screen, and Digger the Mole is on the right, waving at the rest of the cast. And I want to think that was like kind of a tribute to him waving goodbye to the rest of the cast. So it doesn't have anything to do with the Archie Show, but it's an interesting story about Bob Ogle.
Yeah, that is interesting.
But yeah, he wrote almost all of these episodes, and in a lot of them he was listed as the only writer on these, and didn't do any voices in the show, but credited with a lot of the writing. Which are I don't know if he wrote the jokes, but the stories worked well for me because they were only 8 minutes, but there was a logical progression to the stories.
Right.
And the stories made sense to me. Some of them a little whimsical, like really, but you got to give that cartoon license to do these things. But he, would introduce a story, create a conflict, come to a climax and a finale in that short 8 minutes, and they worked.
Yeah.
None of the stories were like, oh, that's dumb.
Yeah, and for the most part, they all had that Archie Comics feel.
Yeah.
Like the Jughead's girl, where Jughead falls in love with this new girl, but she wants nothing to do with him until then she realizes that he's in his sleep. He's going and serenading her in his sleep.
Yeah.
And that they wake him up and he realizes she's looking out the window and she's like fawning over him, but she's got curlers in her hair. And he goes running. I mean, very much of its time. Yeah. But again, very much that was kind of like that's the heart of the Archie comics. So like this kind of like these silly teenagers just doing goofy things.
Because teenagers do goofy things.
Yeah, like the computer is another one where Dilton Doily creates a computer out of a washing machine.
Right.
That can come up with any answer except for when is the War of 1812.
Which is kind of a trick question, but yeah. Oh yeah, that was great.
Yeah, just very much. And actually one that I really liked, I thought it was time, age appropriate, all that stuff, was the flying saucers one. It's just silly enough to just be like, this is goofy, but it was entertaining.
Well, there was all that hysteria about aliens and stuff in the 60s, so it was perfect. I mean, timed very well. It was a reflection of what was going on in the world.
Yeah. I mean, the idea with that episode was that, so the gang minus Reggie, they dress up so it's a costume.
Yeah, it's a costume
contest.
Talent contest.
At the school.
Yeah.
And so Archie, Jughead, and the girls dress up as aliens, and they turn
that
Archie's jalopy into a UFO. Yeah. They obviously do a very good job of it.
Right.
And as they're driving down the street, the police see it, like, there's a flying saucer, and there's they're like trying to track down where the alien flying saucer is. Just silly, but it just worked. It was just like, okay, that's fun. That's a good, fun story.
Well, because of the hysteria, on the radio, there is an alien invasion. You say that invasion word in the 60s and everyone freaks out. Yeah. With good reason, I guess, because that's what they were trained to do.
And the whole time the kids are oblivious to it. They're like, whatever.
We're going to win.
We can go stop and get some gas.
What was Reggie? Reggie was trying to win the contest, too.
He's dressed up as a gorilla.
That's right.
And then they thought he was an escaped gorilla.
Yeah. They're trying to get him back to the zoo. Which, it must have been a good costume then. Yeah. If they assumed he was a real gorilla.
Well, he was convinced it was the best costume because it was Reggie.
It was Reggie's.
Yeah.
Some of the episodes had they all had two stories. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, I liked the stories. There were a couple that I was like, oh, really? Come on. Like the Jughead short double duty where another Jughead shows up. Yeah. And he's a martial arts expert, and he looks just like Jughead, and he's dressed just like Jughead. And guess what? His name is Jughead. What are the odds? What is coincidence? So he gets and the other kids believe that this is their Jughead, and he's like, "How do you know my name?"
Yeah.
It was just that one went a little too far for me. And then episode 6, the marathon runner, so I've run 3 marathons, so I know what it takes to do a marathon. I know you can't train and compete in a marathon in 8 minutes. So I was curious, and they started at the track. A track is a quarter mile around. Mm-hmm. A marathon is 26.2 miles. So you're looking at 105 laps. And I'm like, are they going to stay on the track? No, they go out into the country and they're on this dirt road to the turnaround point and they come back. So the world record for the marathon is 2 hours, 1 minute, 39 seconds. Archie did the whole marathon in 2 minutes and 18 seconds flat. And Jughead was right behind him, wearing his hat and his vest. I was just like, I can't. I know how hard it is to run a marathon, and that just doesn't work for me. They just decide in gym class, we're going to run a marathon. Bunch of high school kids. And away you go.
I will say the one thing I liked about that episode is it's one time where they actually gave Betty a chance to just be smart and kind of shine a little bit, because so the idea with that is Reggie can run the marathon better than everybody, and they all know
he's superhuman speed.
Yeah,
he goes flying past people.
Yeah, and endurance not like you've never seen before. Yeah. And so she tricks him into making him go running all night.
Right.
And so when the actual marathon comes in, he's
gassed.
I mean, he's kicking everybody's butt, and then suddenly he's just like, what's going on? Why can't I run anymore? Yeah. He's like, why am I so tired? And everybody goes running past him because Betty outsmarted him.
Right. It was almost kind of a twist on the tortoise and the hare fable, which was very clever.
Yeah.
I was just annoyed with the marathon thing.
Yeah, no, I get that one.
But yeah, because Betty was at the turnaround going, oh, this is where he's gonna bonk here.
Yeah.
She's like, she knew it was coming. Yeah. It was finally someone got back at Reggie.
One that I felt it was a little too much was when the monkey escapes from the zoo.
Chimp off the old block.
Yeah. And he punches Jughead in the face, and then escapes from the zoo to follow Jughead around like he's his best friend.
Yeah.
And then Jughead's like, well, we got to get you back to the zoo. And so, but how are we going to do it? Because this is when the football tryouts are coming on. He's like, oh, well, we'll put you in a football costume and we'll just walk you right past. Nobody will know the difference. Yeah. Because football players just look like apes when they're in high school, apparently. Right. So then he walks on the field and
Coach puts him in the game.
Well, but he's just like standing there and somebody kicks the ball and he's like, oh, okay. And he grabs the ball and goes running down the field. He knows exactly what to do. And of course, then he flattens Reggie and they makes everybody look bad, and then he climbs up on the goalpost, and his costume, his football
uniform falls
off, and then he's just like
he's just a gorilla.
Like, oh well, we got to get him back to the zoo. All right, well that was easy. Yeah. It's like, all right, the whole gorilla thing was a bit much for me. I mean, Filmation and animals are not the best fit. Hot dog works.
Yeah, because he's a pet.
Yeah, and it works, but yeah.
But if a gorilla escapes from the zoo, it's not the high school football coach's job to take him back. Nor you call the zoo.
Nor is it the gangly high school kid who got punched in the face by the gorilla either.
Right. Which, first of all, how do you get that close to the gorilla? Yeah, some of them are like, come on. Mm-hmm. You're running out of ideas here.
Yeah.
You're better than this. Yeah, so it was fun. I mean, the Archie Show was fun to watch. It wasn't painful to watch.
No.
Some of the things, that doesn't really work. So, good, bad, and the ugly. For the good, I thought the animation was really clean. You could tell the backgrounds were just backgrounds, but the characters were drawn well. They reused the animation a lot, especially in the music segments, but it was good animation. Mm-hmm. And the music was good. Mm-hmm. Those were my two goods. I really enjoyed those parts of it.
Yeah, I mean, they looked like, the animation was good. They looked like the Archie characters.
Right.
I mean, they looked like they just stepped off the comic book
Exactly,
page.
Yep.
And I mentioned it before, it feels like an Archie comic, the way that it's segmented out. Even though it's very formulaic, it still works really, because that's how the Archie comics are.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't read the comics. Yeah. So then it makes sense to me now that that's why it's formatted that way.
Yeah, and it lent the format, and then the characters themselves just worked very well with the format that they wanted to be kind of tied to music and have that kind of pop music component. It just worked really well. That was the right property to work that with. Not the Brady kids. That was not the property to try and shoehorn that thing.
It didn't work at all.
This actually worked really well, and it was the right property or licensed characters to follow the monkeys as an animated component. It just worked really well.
Yeah, I agree. The bad for me was the character development and interactions I didn't get. No. I didn't get the whole, why does nobody understand that Veronica and Betty are flirting with the same guy, but Betty doesn't seem to care that Veronica's flirting with this guy, and Veronica doesn't seem to care that Betty's flirting with her guy. It's just, and Archie seemed oblivious to the whole thing. Like, this doesn't add up. And the whole thing, why are they hanging out with Reggie? Mm-hmm. So that character development and interaction, I just that sucks.
Yeah.
Because it was a constant annoyance to me. Yeah. Like, didn't she see that? What is going on?
I see that, and actually part of my bad was, I touched on it already, was like the voices of those three characters, like particularly Veronica, really just kind of
yeah.
It worked by the end. I got over it within the matter of episodes. Like, okay, that's just her voice, and it's fine. I'm good with it.
She didn't have a lot of lines though.
No, but it always felt weird. It
didn't fit.
Yeah, like Riverdale is kind of like middle America, and why does she have a Southern accent?
Yeah,
and yeah, there's the Veronica's Veil where she pretends like she's coming from another country, but then she says like she still has a Southern accent. She's like, well, I'm from the southern part of the country. Which is kind of a clever thing, but it's still like, how do you not figure this one out?
Well, and her dad had white hair and a white mustache and looked like he was in his 70s. Which is too old to have a teenage daughter, in my opinion.
Well,
but if you're wealthy, maybe
one never knows.
Yeah.
The voice is a little bit, again, I got over it, and by the end of it, it all seemed to fit. But that initially, it was kind of a little bit of a jarring, and the the Archie comics, there's enough characters that they could have brought in more things, more characters to bring in. I mean, there's only a handful of adults in there. Archie's dad shows up a couple times. The coach, Principal Weatherby, and then Miss Grundy, the teacher, and then Pop. I mean, even Pop's just like barely there. Yeah. But I mean, there's other high school kids. I mean, Moose. Yeah, the big dumb jock athlete, and his girlfriend Midge. I mean, they're pretty prominent in the comics. But they aren't in this. They did introduce Dilton Doily kind of in the second half of the series, but there's also Ethel, who's like very basically the female version of Jughead, right? And then Sabrina the Teenage Witch, who they would bring in the next season, and also Josie and the Pussycats. Yeah, they lost a big opportunity with that because I mean Hanna-Barbera would jump on that a couple years later and introduce a Josie and the Pussycats series and take that very similar kind of do a mix of Archie and then Scooby-Doo. Yeah, which is a bit of an odd choice for Josie, but yeah, we can get to that when we get to that show.
When we get to that show,
yeah, but and it just felt like there was more. There was more left on the table that they could have jumped on. Eventually, they would start to do that more in subsequent animation series that they would do. But in this one, it just felt like they had more to work with that they didn't take advantage of.
Yeah, I was reading some other reviews of this cartoon, which I always do just to see what other people thought of it. And I found one by Hal Erickson. He wrote a book called Television Cartoon Shows. And he described Archie as not what one would call inspired because of the fragmented humor and the overuse of a canned laugh track. Well, but then I started looking into the canned laugh track, and they were really the first ones to do that. And by the 80s, everybody was using the laugh track.
That definitely was not uncommon, especially throughout the 70s. I mean, that was a thing.
Well, in the 70s, like the Flintstones and the Jetsons were meant for adults, and they were in prime time. Yeah. They had the laugh track to get the adults' attention. Yeah. But I think they were the first kids' cartoon to use it.
Yeah, so it was not an uncommon thing. So, no. But yeah. I mean, we've watched enough of these, it doesn't really phase me anymore.
Even hear it.
Yeah, I don't really notice it anymore. So,
any ugly here?
Yes, unfortunately, not much, thankfully. Yeah. But episode 15 was a bit of a hot mess. There's a couple things. One, the dance of the week was the Indian dance, where you basically kind of do an Indian dance where you're kind of like hunched over and the powwow, and then you hold your two fingers behind your head like you're wearing an Indian headdress. And that was
that's the cartoon version of Red Face.
Yeah, essentially it was. By today's standards, a terrible choice.
Well, the dance was the Indian, and the song was 17 Ain't Young. Which that doesn't.
Again, another one that just the dance doesn't work anyway, but then it doesn't work with this very 17 Ain't Young is basically a ballad. And it's talking about like these two people, like, hey, we're in love and we're 17. We're not young. We're going to prove them that we can do this. Right. It has nothing to do with dancing, doing like the Indian dance. Like, oh, yeah, come on. Yeah. It's just like, well, we need to fill that. We need a dance to come up with this. So how can we offend people? And then they would follow that up with... the second segment, the longer segment from that episode was Reggie's cousin, which is Reggie's little nephew. Of course, seems like almost every show has this precocious kid who's just going to get in trouble all the time. Right. Everybody's like, oh, what do we do with this kid? Yeah. And it opens up with, like, when they introduce this kid, it's Reggie's tied up, and he's dressed up as he's got like the Native American American garb, and he's got like the little tomahawk and the feathers in his hair. Like, oh, come on.
He looked like Chief Wahoo from the Cleveland Indians.
Like, we're riding this. We're going to ride this one into the ground. Eventually, they would discard. They would move on to that because then they go camping. And, But it's just from the dance to including that dance in a song that doesn't match it to then opening the next segment with
the little Indian terrorist.
Yes.
It was a little cringeworthy.
It was ugly.
Yeah. I saw that too. Otherwise, pretty vanilla. I mean, pretty harmless. And, Brady's who says harmless entertainment. And I said, is it really entertainment? This was entertaining and harmless.
Yeah. It was a wholesome cartoon. Yeah. It works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there weren't any uncomfortable situations. There wasn't any real peril.
Mm-hmm.
It was just high school kids hanging out and playing a song.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing dances that don't really match the music, but yeah,
Right.
it worked.
Yeah.
No, I really liked it. I thought, other than the one bit of ugly, no, it worked. It was a good cartoon.
Yeah. Well, and I think if it was, if the goal was we want to emulate the monkeys in an animation form and we want to follow this Archie comic, they did it.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it that way, that we want to format this cartoon like the comic books, we want the music to be a big part of this, and then the music, okay, we'll make the music good, and they did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoyed it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what would you rank this out of a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 as we do?
Yeah, I feel like I've been top heavy on a lot of my rankings, other than the Brady Kids. And
don't forget Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan got a 3.
Well, Rainbow Bright didn't fare that well.
Rainbow Bright was slightly above that. I was in between 6 and 7.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I know, because I didn't know about the formatting of the comic book,
Mm-hmm.
but now that I know that, it pushes it closer to a 7.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm going to land.
Yeah, I'm at 7, and actually part of it's it's a good adaptation of the source material,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the kind of the lasting legacy, like the way this set up, then subsequent series and kind of the success for Filmation through Archie, really established in this series, and I mean they only built on it, made it better.
Yeah.
And
And here we are, 62
theory,
62 years later,
yeah.
and it's still on television.
Yeah,
and
and-
in some form.
And you can still hear Sugar, and on the radio. But yeah,
for
I mean,
sure.
was-
In almost any movie that's depicting the 60s,
Mhm.
late 60s, early 70s,
Yeah.
you hear that song.
yeah,
Because it was number 1.
yeah, and it is all kind of established through this initial series and the choices that they made to make this focused on pop music. So
Yeah.
no, I mean, I think there's the legacy enough being true to the Archie comics,
Mhm.
and then the legacy they established. I think that builds it beyond kind of like the animation level. It kind of bumps everything up a little bit more
Right.
than what it probably normally would have been. So yeah, that's where I fell in at a 7 as well.
Yeah. Oh, weird. So you and we never talk about
No.
how we're going to rank it until the end of the conversation when we do, and
Mhm.
we're right next to each other on this
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so-
real interesting.
Yeah, it worked out well.
Yeah.
So next
Very
week,
cool.
we've got something. We're going to go back to superheroes. What are we doing?
Let's do Super Friends.
Absolutely. I think what we'll do is we'll break our trend. Normally we take the first series of each character, that introduction. I think next time we go right to my bread and butter. The one cartoon I remember distinctly getting up Saturday mornings and waiting for I didn't know what time it was on. I don't know what channel it was on.
Care.
But I sat there and waited for the challenge of the Super Friends to come on, because that was the show that hit me right where I lived. So.
Oh, yeah. And nothing's cooler than superheroes when you're a kid.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I hear, Mom, I think it's time for us to go outside. So that means cartoon time is over. I'm John.
I'm Robert.
And this is Toon Talk.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you want more Toon Talk, you can find us on Twitter at Toon Talk Guys.
Or if you've got questions, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at toontalkguys@gmail.com.